Hey everyone, my name is Daniel Culliford.
Hey, Daniel.
I'm actually really excited to talk to you guys about revival. It's very interesting, I guess, how I don't know exactly how I've gotten this obsession with revival. It's happened early on, and I just started, I've always been a reader, and so I just love to read. I always did when I was a kid. I always read far above my reading level when I was young. And, so whenever I became a Christian, one of the emphasis, I remember being in grade school. I don't know if it was like middle school or something, and it was American history. And I remember them talking about a guy named Charles Finney. And because they talked about the awakenings that we had. And so his name and his story has always stood out to me even before I was saved. And I was like, wow, this is a very interesting person. And so I don't know, I guess that's kind of, I've always been a history buff too, like just in general. And so, I'm excited to share with you these things. I don't even know how many books I've read on revival. Like on the very last page is all of the books that I can remember. These are just the books that I can remember that I've read on revival. And some of them I've started, not these, I've finished all of these, but there's other books that I've started and not finished and, stuff like that. Some of them can be very academic, and so it's like not fun to read. I like to read fun things. But anyhow, so usually when people say the word revival, they think of, oh, we're going to have a revival on such and such a day. And, if you in the Bible Belt, you've probably heard that. Like, oh, pastor's going to hold a revival. And that's not historically what revival is. That's just a catchy phrase that they use for extended meetings, in the church. Historic revival is very different. It's something that impacts entire communities. And so if you flip back over to the front page, we'll look at a couple of different terms that you might hear at some point. Or, some people will say, oh, that wasn't a revival, that was a renewal, which could be true, depending on what kind of things took place. So renewal is characterized within a church setting, so that's within a church, consisting, of a heightened awareness or desperation of change. Usually, though, it's more of an internal, personal experience where all of a sudden it's like a group of people will shift in moral or spiritual awareness. It's like, oh my gosh, the light came on. That's more of a renewal. It's not something that's like broadcasted and just like you might think of like a whole city got saved. It's a little bit smaller. Sometimes those subsequent revivals start there, though. That's like the first flickers, the first flames that you begin to see. So then you have the term revival, of course, and it's also characterized within a church setting or multi-church setting. So it begins to become a little bit more regional, and it's larger in scale than a renewal, but it's typically known for more passionate and intense meetings, contrasted by a previous staleness or dryness or lukewarmness. But the outside looking in or the inside looking around would say they were once dead, but now they're alive. And so the coolest one, in my opinion, the coolest one is an awakening. And these are the ones that will impact the whole world. So it's similar to revival regarding the intensity and power, but larger in scale. Ecclesial is just a fancy word for church, basically, or the functions of the church. So ecclesial and cultural boundaries fade, spreading throughout communities, workplaces, states, countries, and even continents. And so this kind of scale would be like when you leave church, you go to work, and it's like being at church. That's ultimately one of the main differences between just a basic revival and an awakening. You will see people out in the streets singing hymns. You'll see people out everywhere you go. You cannot escape God's presence. It's tangible. It's palpable. You see people crying, weeping, and that kind of gives you perspective on what some of these people were seeing in the first and second Great Awakening. So to give you a little more context, flip over to the third page where it shows the timelines. So I want you kind of to see the timeline so that you can, as we begin, I feel like this will help you understand what was going on in those days. So, and maybe some of the names might stand out to you. I accidentally spelled George Whitfield's name wrong, but it's fine. I'm missing an E. So the First Great Awakening was before the Revolution, before we had the Revolutionary War. America is being colonized still. We're not an independent nation. And this is one of the more profound, I think. There's only a couple, there's several, they say there's 6 awakenings, okay? There's really, in my opinion, there's really 2. The others are mostly revival. But that's just my opinion. When you look at the scale of the first and the second Great Awakening, it's almost unbelievable if you are not in that time period. If you're not living in that time period. If we had not had, this will show you how important it is. If we had not had the First Great Awakening, we would have never had a revolution. We would have never split from Britain. This is how monumental this awakening was. And it happened primarily, so these dates are rough estimates. It's not an exact science. Nobody can go to the one instant in the moment and say this is when it started and this is when it ended. So it's just kind of guesstimations. But some of the figures here are very fascinating. Jonathan Edwards, George Whitefield, John and Charles Wesley. So Jonathan Edwards was a Baptist preacher. And so I really love this because he literally he wrote out his sermons word for word and preached those sermons. However, because God's presence was so thick and tangible and real, he was preaching the same sermons. The only thing that changed in his life in that time period was that his prayer life increased. He was still preaching the same stuff, the same things that he had always learned, but he began to pray more. And he realized that there was a spiritual deadness in the region that he was, preaching in. And all of a sudden, through that deep, intense life of prayer, the same sermons that he wrote out, he was characterized in history as being one of the most monotone preachers that you would ever hear. However, people began to be impacted. And so this is the heritage of the Baptist Church. And sadly, and it's gotten better, but when I was growing up, when we went to the Baptist Church, it was like piano, you stand, you sit down, very dry. This was not what they experienced. So they may have had some of those same fundamental things, but people were weeping. People were crying in services. People, even his own wife, got hit by the Holy Spirit and fell out and sobbed and cried for hours. Their meetings would go on for hours because people wouldn't leave, not because he wasn't done, the service wasn't over. It just went on and on and on. And if a Baptist person today, or maybe more of fundamental would hear that and say, that was a Baptist preacher? Because, all kinds of signs took place. And to me, that's very fascinating because God doesn't care about what denomination you are. If he wants to interrupt your service, he's going to interrupt your service. There's nothing you can do about it. And so similarly, George Whitefield, John and Charles Wesley. So John Wesley and George went to the same school, Oxford University in England. Have y'all ever heard of Oxford University? Mm-hmm. It's like one of the most prestigious universities in the whole world. No, most people don't know it because they've become so liberal, but they were originally, like, if you wanted to become a preacher in England, that's where you went to school. And so they still produce some preachers, but not at the same scale. And so they went to school together. They were in the Anglican denomination, which is, if you're familiar with that, it's just the Church of England's state. Back in the days of the kings and queens, they had a state religion, and it was the Anglican. So that's where they went to school. They hung out with some friends who were Moravians, who were missionaries, and they would go to these meetings, and they taught them to pray because they were already finished. They were already astute. They were taught. The whole thing. They finished school, but they knew there was something on the inside of them that said, "There's got to be more than preaching on a Sunday and then going home. Like, where is the God of the Bible?" They began to ask these questions. And so, of course, when you ask brave questions like that, you're going to find an answer. And so in these meetings, they began to get filled with the Holy Spirit. And George Whitefield never left his Anglican denomination. However, John and Charles Wesley did, and they founded what is today the modern Methodist denomination. So they were what was called the Methodists. And so it is said, I believe, that John Wesley traveled he traveled in England. That's where it started. All the churches said, don't let a man in the church building with the name John. Anyone with the name John, do not let them in the building, because of how powerful and how notorious his name became. They didn't like it. So he said, all right, fine, I'll leave and I'll go to America. And so he followed George Whitefield to America. And the revival spread in unbelievable ways. They said that John Wesley traveled, I think it combined, they followed his tracks through the churches over the years, and I think it was over 270,000 miles on horseback.
Wow.
That is crazy. Preached over 40,000 sermons. 40,000 sermons. George Whitefield preached so much that, literally, most revivalists in these days don't live very long because of the intensity of what they're doing. And George Whitefield would preach to such masses and he was so loud and such a great orator that he could, I think one meeting had 30,000 people, and they, with no microphone, no help, and they could hear him fine, perfectly. 30,000 people. So these are just a few of the, I'm just trying to give y'all why I'm so passionate about this. This is incredible. It almost sounds inhuman, but it's recorded in history. So people have mapped this thing out. It's pretty impressive. So I want to leave you with a few quotes. So did y'all kind of understand the differences between renewal, revival, and awakening? It's really just kind of like the scale, the size. So I'm going to go back to the quotes here. It says, another figure in the second Great Awakening is Charles Finney. Charles Finney was born a lawyer, not born a lawyer, but that was his occupation. He began to get very. He grew up in a Bible believing family and stuff like that, but he began to get very, I'd say, very calloused. He was just. He knew the scripture. He was actually a singer. He was on the what we would call worship team, and even had an office in the church. He was just a good person, knew the word, but he realized that there was something missing. He realized that it's hard to read the Bible and not think, man, we're missing something today. And so that's where he found himself, and he began to go on this deep journey of pursuing the more of God, pursuing the Holy Spirit. He was a Presbyterian background, and a great lawyer, fantastic lawyer. And on the day after he was filled with the Holy Spirit, he tried to go back to his career, tried to go back to his law, because that's all he knew, That's how he made money. And he was sitting with his client, and every time he tried to talk about legal things, he began to weep. He could not get just mundane, basic words out because of the power that God had put upon him. And he told this client of his, and it's some legal phrase, and I'm drawing a blank, but it's like, he was just saying, God has captured my heart. I was supposed to represent you, but he's captured my heart. All I can do is represent him. And that was his last day as a lawyer. And so, let's see, we'll get into, here's some of his quotes. I'm sorry, I don't know where to go next. Finney's most controversial claim was that a revival is not a miracle or dependent on a miracle in any sense. This is really semantics. So, a lot of people don't like that, but when you hear his explanation, it makes a lot more sense. So, all right, that was hot. All right, appropriate means. It says, he argued it is the philosophical result of the right use of the constituted means. You can see the lawyer in it. All right. Just as a farmer expects a harvest after tilling and sowing, he's saying we have revival because we institute prayer, we institute these certain things, and that's when revival takes place. So it's really semantics. These are all things that God does. Human agency. He believed humans are moral agents who must actively choose to obey. Waiting for God to send a revival without using these means was to Finney as absurd as a farmer waiting for a crop without planting. So, he was, of course, shunned and pushed out of so many. All of these people that I've mentioned to you were pushed out of churches. They began to utilize something called open air or frontier ministry. And which means all of the old lights, the old flames is what they would call it, all of the preachers of the churches, they would create such an uproar that they're like, fine, if you don't want to invite us to your church, we'll just preach out here on the lawn. We'll go preach at the business. The business people will invite us. Finney was notorious for visiting, in those days, so, all right, on the timeline, you'll see the Second Great Awakening, and it says 1790 to 1840. Well, as you know, so this is post-revolution. This is during the cotton boom. So in the South, you had the cotton farms that were sending all of their cotton north, where they were having an industrial revolution. They began building these massive textile mills, and so in the Northeast in those days, not like now, they're just, all kinds of things up there. But back then, it would have just been a lot of buildings that were stockpiling cotton and all of these things to make clothing. Because previous to that, you would make your own clothing. So in these textile mills, you would have a lot of women workers. You would have a lot of children workers, because this is before labor laws. When I mean children workers, I mean like 6, 7, 8 years old. It was horrible. They would work a lot of hours. Of course, in the South, and actually also in the North, at this point in time, slavery was a huge thing. So there was a lot of social calamity. In the same way, in the First Great Awakening, there was a lot of social calamity. There were people, they would do what was, in the First Great Awakening, they would do what was called halfway covenants, where it's like, it was just a way to try to draw members and say, well, you can never do these certain things in the church, but because you're only halfway committed, we'll count you as a member, we'll get you saved, you'll say. So it was a lot of just, let me look good on the outside, but it was dead on the inside. Same thing began to take place in the Second Great Awakening. People were working themselves to death. There was slavery. There was all of these social dilemmas taking place. There was also in those days the prohibition. So the movement for prohibition. So there was alcoholism was at a sky high because, all right, they didn't have the laws that we do today where it's, you can only be 21, or whatever. In those days, anyone could drink. So it was a huge problem. And people were very depressed in those days because of the low wages. Because, it may be even worse then than now, where it's like, middle class can lead a pretty decent life. In those days, it was like, you had to be rich. If you were not part of the 1%, so to speak, it was hard. So, all right, so let me try to get back here. So yeah, kind of setting the stage of that's what is contextually going on in these days. So Charles Finney and many others, they would go to the frontiers, because you have to remember, the West was not a thing yet. You had the East. Everything east of the Mississippi River was being utilized, right? Even some things east of the Mississippi River was still just frontier. Kentucky, Indiana, all of these states, that would have been their West. They're going out there to settle. So there were no cities, there were no churches. There were just maybe some corridors of like dirt roads, where to nothing. Indians, all of these different things. This is what their West was. So that's why the circuit riders have them in parentheses in the timeline. Those are the circuit riders. And they were a profound group. They were like the Navy SEALs of missionaries. I mean, we could go and read you all the things that they accomplished in such a short amount of time. It would blow your mind, some of the things that they did. But if you'll see, one of the names on there is Francis Asbury. That's where Jim went to school, Asbury University. So it's in Kentucky. The circuit riders, one of which traveled 270,000 miles in the circuit on horseback. All the same conditions as John Wesley. Preached over 30,000 sermons. Just a profound individual, and did all of those things, I would say, in a very short time. To go travel that distance. I mean, it's 60,000 miles around the whole world, or less? Is it less than that? I don't know. So that's pretty wild. Okay. Human agency. He believed humans are moral agents who must actively choose to obey. So this would be countercultural then. The predominant view in their theology was that God had to do everything. That's part of why a lot of these older pastors and leaders in those days did not like these guys, because they thought that they were preaching strange doctrines, when really these doctrines, Arminian doctrine has been around since, I don't even know, centuries probably, at least 1,000 years, So, and so it was outside of their normal ideas. And so I'm not here to teach Calvinism or Arminianism. I'm not really here to tell you that. Some of these revivalists were Calvinists. George Whitefield was a Calvinist through and through, but he also had this deep sense of, I must go and preach the gospel. I must see people saved. If I don't go, who will? And so, and on the flip side, they were all taught in the same school. John Wesley was totally Arminian. It's like, we have to ask God for things. We have to do these things so that God will move, Either way, you wind up still at the same point. Somebody's got to go and preach the gospel, And so in the end of their life, they began to put those things aside. Because they started out as best friends, then they disagreed with each other theologically, and then they came back full circle, and God still moved on both sides. God will do what he wants to do. We just have to believe. Okay. Waiting for God to send a revival without using these means was to Finney as absurd as a farmer waiting for a crop without planting. So what are these means and agencies that precede revival? So these are just a few things that I've gathered as I've studied. There could be more. Passionate prayer meetings. Behind every known revival or awakening is an intercessory group praying and pleading that God would take residence. You cannot point to any revival, I don't care where it is, every single one of them had this secret little group that was asking God to move. I'll give you a little tidbit. There was a Hebrides revival post-World War II, so it's like in the 40s and 50s. There were these two old ladies that were in their 80s, and they were intercessors. One of which was blind, Peggy and Christine Smith. I think I put them in the timeline. And they would pray together, and they just believed that God would just capture this island, Scottish island. And this is what's fascinating. I thought this was cool, but Donald Trump, that was their great aunt. Those two ladies were his great aunts.
Wow.
Yeah, isn't that wild?
It is.
And so the first time that he was inaugurated, he has their Bible, the Bible that they read and studied. That was the Bible that was used for his inauguration. It's his Bible. I guess they handed it off to him, or maybe a family member did. So we need that. That really struck me, because it's like, man, we really need to pray for this guy. Because he's, y'all probably heard him say it. He may not be saved or whatever. Like, if he is saved, we know why, because of these two ladies. So, I just believe in that legacy though will continue, and he will be saved, and be sure of it. So there's the passionate intercessors. Here's a biblical precedence. So I don't want to just only not, I don't want to leave out scripture here. Jesus is said to be the great intercessor, seated at the right hand of the Father, making intercession on behalf of the saints. You can also see this written out in John chapter 16 and 17. All right, number 2, his conviction of sin, typically induced by strong orators and ministers who have a deep life in God marked by prayer, study, and love for God and man. You can see that in the first revival, the first awakening, in Acts chapter 2, 36. It's actually pretty cool to see that when you kind of look at the book of Acts. When you relook at the book of Acts and you hear these points and you go back and read, it's like, wow, These are the same things that happen today. The number 3 is unity of believers. It says, when church leaders, members, etc., set aside distractions and differences, worldly ambitions and the like, and begin to prioritize things important to God and the well-being of one another. You also see that in the book of Acts. I listed a couple of different places where you begin to see the generosity. And when our older 2 kids were little, we used to have them recite Acts 4:32, and it's all the believers were one in heart and mind, and no one kept anything for themselves but gave everything, and so they shared everything. And so this is one of the marks of revival, is that other churches begin to benefit and prosper, and it's not a singular thing. It's not like, oh, this is just a point as revival. It impacts all the churches, and all the churches overflow. They actually cannot contain all the people coming to church in a true awakening or revival. I've got a few more quotes here from Peter Cartwright. He was one of the circuit riders. He was the gun-toting preacher. It's like, it's funny. I guess he had to have been from the South, because if you threaten him, he might shoot you, but he would also get you saved before you die. So, Peter Cartwright, frontier preacher, I have seen hundreds of sinners fall like men slain in mighty battle. James McGready, the power of God seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth, and the cry of the penitent broke through the air. You have to understand, these meetings, when they say frontier, they're in the middle of the woods. There's nothing there. Some of these people that they're seeing come to be saved are Indians. Some of these people are just mountain men, just trappers and fur traders and all of the things that would have been taking place in those days. And it's fascinating because some people would follow them around, like tons and tons of people would just follow them through these places that they would go. Francis Asbury said, "I must ride or I must die. The gospel must be carried to the cabins of the wilderness." All right, so this is like the next segment. Why is revival important or necessary? Again, there are plenty of answers to this question. So, any of y'all have anything that's not on my paper? Or it could be something you think of, but it's on the paper. But, y'all are cheating.
Are you asking that question to us, or are you asking us if we have more questions?
Why do y'all think revival would be necessary?
Oh my goodness.
Because it brings more people to God.
Yeah, true.
It awakens
There's not a lot of
them.
wrong
It
answers.
revives
To
them.
bring back to life.
Yes.
Reviving.
Yeah.
See, refreshing.
Refreshing
Yeah,
and renewing us.
I cheated because I read through here a little bit, and it says a lot of churches they become stagnant.
Yeah.
They just lose their passion.
Yeah.
The revival brings it back and but also brings up the youth and to be able to.
That's my favorite part. It's like the generational thing.
Yeah.
So we can go through. So, what were you saying? Go ahead. Did you have something else?
No.
Okay, I'm sorry. So, churches generally, historically speaking, have a tendency to decline in effectiveness, passion, influence, and fruitfulness over time. It's no different than when you start a job. When the first probably year that you start a new job, you're like, yeah, let's go. And then over time, somebody says something, or, you might have a disagreement with the boss or whatever. You begin to kind of lose that same, affection that you had for that job. It's a very normal
Revives it.
Do what?
But a raise.
A raise will revive it for a little while. That's true. But yeah, I think it's less about the church and more about the human condition. We just have, that's just anything that you can think of that needs some longevity. It's going to be tested. Your marriage is going to be tested. All of these things. This is common to all people, and revival can reinvigorate all of these things. Revival produces healthy, vibrant, caring people and families. Revival cascades through culture affecting the social and moral climate. Revival historically creates a strong draw for young people to attend and be involved in churches, and has generational impact. Revival provides strong evidence to skeptics, atheists, and the lost. Revival separates true leaders from false ones. That is a very key one, because if in the days of these awakenings, if some of the churches then had been more approving and more accepting, see, a lot of these revivalists entered into a dilemma. All of these people are getting saved, but everything that they just experienced when they go to the church local, they're being rebuked for it. They're not being discipled in it. And so that's why I believe in our nation we have a church on every street corner, because we are so fractured, because we think that theology is everything. Oh, you don't believe the same way as I do? Oh, well, I'll just start my own church.
Right. Right.
And that's why you end up in these fractured dilemmas that we have, where people are so, like, we had a pastor's luncheon a couple months ago, and the city, the mayor hosted it, and we came, Lindsay and I went, and there was a lot of people in our city that I'd never met before that were pastors. I might have heard of the church, but I'd never met them. We live in the same city. We're doing the same work, and so it's not supposed to be that way, and it's really sad. And so a lot of these revivalists in the secret place, in their private prayer time, they're weeping and crying for the people who just got saved, because they know what's waiting for them when they go to the church, because they're not going to be discipled, and they're going to be talked out of their experience that they had with God. And so it's really, really a sad thing. Let's see. I'm trying to think of any others. Harry Hoosier. This is where you get the name. Y'all know Indiana Hoosier. All right. This is my opinion on that. It's very debated. It's very disputed, but this is in the running for why that state is called the Hoosier State. Harry Hoosier was a black man who was a slave that had been purchased and freed by Francis Asbury. Francis and the circuit riders were, all of the second great awakening leaders were very against slavery. And Francis was brilliant. He knew that, the black people in the communities are not going to listen to me because I'm a white guy. Let me train this African American to preach and to teach and all of these things, and he can minister to them and I'll minister to them. Well, he didn't know this, but as he was journeying on these circuits, Harry would ride with him shotgun. And as Francis would read and study the word, he would always read the word out loud. And he didn't know it, but Harry was memorizing every word he said. And this man ended up memorizing almost the entirety of the Bible. And not only that, but his primary audience was white people. He was so profound as an orator, he would speak to many thousands of people. And he was loved by everyone because of how dynamic he was. It's a very, very cool story. Let's see. Some of you in here, you're like, well, I don't study as much as you, Daniel. I can never do some of these things that we're talking about. I'll tell you why you can. in 1857, 1858, the businessman's revival in New York. There was a man named Jeremiah Calvin Lanphier, and he decided on his lunch break, they would get a lunch break. And on the lunch break, he assembled some business people, and they started a prayer group that was only 1 hour long, or it might have even been less than that, but he allotted, it was 1 hour, 5 minutes per person to pray as they grew. They're like, all right, you have 5 minutes, because he wanted to make sure that everybody prayed. This was just a business person. Okay, this was what, I hate the phrase, the lay person. It's such a Catholic thing to say. I know it's in other denominations, but it really has no biblical precedence. There's no such thing as a lay person. We're all people who love God or we don't. Okay, you know. And so this man who was untrained, uneducated, started a huge revival in New York City, or New York. I don't know if it was in New York City.
It was.
It was in New York. Probably was though. All right. Let's see. The Azusa Street Revival. A lot of people don't know, but this also began in Jackson, Mississippi, when William Seymour came through.
Do we know who he came to see?
He came to see a particular man, and I'm trying to remember his name now.
Book, not Azusa, does not say who he came to see. He came to see
Somebody, yeah.
mentor.
Yeah, yeah. And so, which is cool, yeah, Jackson, yeah. So I always thought that was a very cool thing. He got something sparked here that led him there, and a powerful revival, which you've already talked about it. So let's see, the Hebrides revival. This is the revival on an island in Scotland. And a very, very powerful revival. It was something that was so culturally impacting that the police had nothing to do because all the bars were empty. They literally just had to join in with what was taking place because there was no crime. In every one of these instances of awakenings and revivals that I'm mentioning to, crime disappears. It disappears. It's not for years, non-existent. People are getting along so well and so sober-minded that crime disappears. As far as I know in America, there's no social outcome of justice or punishment that has ever done that. Not that I disagree with it. I'm just saying this is something that is beyond natural. This is unnatural, you know. It's incredible though. Again, the churches were so full that they had to. It says that people would be kneeling and praying out in the streets of mud, in the elements, because they could not even get in the buildings. That's how powerful the movement was, and it was primarily led by a man named Duncan Campbell. I put his book. It's a fantastic short read. I put one of his books in there, The Price and Power of Revival. It's a short read. You would love it. Let's see, and of course, y'all have probably all heard of the Jesus Movement, which took place in California. Just a very cool story, and you know, I'll say this because there's a lot of things that you hear about Lonnie Frisbee. In every one of these people are still human. You know, Peter Cartwright was a gun-toting preacher. Okay, now Lonnie Frisbee did fall pretty far, you know, and I do hope that he's in heaven, but it is understood, we know that God used him. God can use anybody, you know, and so if you look into Lonnie Frisbee's life, don't get hung up in his mistakes. He really did want to serve the Lord. He just fell into sin. You know, it's tragic.
In and out of it.
In and out. I mean, he just had some troubles.
We all do the same thing. May not be in the severity of him, but we fall out.
And I think what really set it off was his struggle in the spotlight. You know, having the eyes because this is in the days of television, so the whole world saw him. You know, So, all right, look, I'm out of time, but I have nothing left anyway, so.
You got another hour?
Oh, another hour.
Keep going if you need to.
So I want y'all to look at this book list. And that way I can explain to you some of these that you would like to read or not. That way you can kind of keep your list concise if you'd like to read it. So of course, the one I told you, you can circle The Price and Power of Revival. That's a really, again, a good read. It's short and it's very informative about the revival there in Scotland. The second one, Todd Smith, this is like a devotion. This is a really good devotion from revival type teachers and leaders. And it's just good for day-to-day things. It's igniting revival fire every day. I like the Shantung revival. I'm not going to say circle it. If you're a Baptist background though, and you have some of those ties, I would encourage you to read it because this is what's sad. In this particular book, they documented all these unbelievable miracles took place in this revival, and I believe Shantung is in China, and it was a Baptist-led missionary revival. But some of the Baptist schools omitted the miracles out of the testimonies. And that was tragic to me because it's like, why? Why would you omit? So you have two different versions. You have the version, the one that I put on here that has retained all the miracles. And then you have the version where they omitted all the miracles. Or most of the miracles. Anything that they think was not, a miracle, I guess. I really love Leonard Ravenhill. He was a dear friend of, I believe he was a dear friend of either Moody or Wigglesworth. Might have been, of course, it could have been both. But he's an incredible writer and teacher. His books are short, but they're very stirring. Like when you read it, it really draws you to a deep place of prayer. Like a Mighty Wind is an Indonesian revival. I will tell you, this is some of the most crazy miracles I've ever read. Just as crazy as the ones in the Bible. I mean, it's pretty wild. Some of these villagers would walk on water across raging rivers filled with crocodiles to reach these unreached villagers, and just the detail and how they describe these things and the faith that they had to step out into these raging crocodile-infested rivers shows you their faith. They even recorded one time because in Indonesia they have no ability to grow grapes, and so they would do communion and they would just do it with water and bread. And every time, though, they would pray and say, Lord, bless the cup and make this wine. And in one of the instances, God turned it into wine. And so it's a very, very cool thing. And it's kind of written from an eyewitness perspective. If you like to cry, I would say I would encourage you to read "Chasing the Dragon" by a lady named Jackie Pullinger. She was from England and got on a wild hare when she was a teenager and decided to sail to Hong Kong and started basically these youth mission groups. And in those days in Hong Kong, opium was such a powerful substance in their culture that little children would be totally just addicted from very young ages. And she would take all of these little kids in and minister to them and fight against the gangs. She saw gang leaders. In China, even to this day, there's a gang called the Triads. And she would minister to these gang members and see them converted. And you know what? I love it because she also talks about the failures. Sometimes when you read revival, you read only about the successes and you don't hear about the failures. She writes in the failures. The moments of heartache, the moments of pain where some of these young kids and teenagers would go back into that life. And that's just part of it. People have choices. And so that's why it's a tearjerker. Let's see. Jonathan Goforth, Presbyterian from Canada, missionary in China. The things that he and his wife went through are just unfathomable. They tried to raise a family there and had several of their children die at young ages, but they persevered. Saw many thousands of people come to know Christ there. 1,000 Miles of Miracles, if you've ever heard the Boxer Rebellion, it's about that. Let's see, Lectures on Revival is hard to read. I'm just going to tell you, Finney is a very lawyer brain. It's there. I would pick it apart. I would find the topics that you want and read just those topics, because other parts are just hard to read. But there is some really good stuff in there. Any of these books by Smith and Wigglesworth are fantastic. One of my favorite people is Charles Spurgeon. I've only put one of his books in here, but I've read several of his books, and they're very short reads. But he is called the Prince of Preachers. He was a Reformed Baptist preacher. He ended up leaving the Baptist denomination because of some differences. But it is said that there has been no man, at least in person, in the world who has preached to more people. He maintained a congregation of 6,000 people for 38 years, not including all of the crazy ones that took place where there might be 20, 30, 100,000 people. So he was just a deep soul, so like if you have a Reformed Baptist background and you want to hear some things from him, he talks deeply about prayer. He's just an incredible person. John G. Lake led some of the healing revivals on the West Coast. Spokane, Washington, I put in there. Diary of God's General. I've read other books of his, but they're all really good. And he just records crazy miracles and stuff. It's just very good. Yeah, so that's all I've got. Do y'all have any questions or anything? Any practical questions? Like, I guess I can be maybe too vague when, you might wonder, like, well, when you say pray more deeply, like, how did they pray? Or something like that. I can kind of fill you in on stuff like that.
Well, fill us in.
Do what now?
Fill us
Okay. And this will kind of tie into intercessory stuff, but for instance, Charles Finney had a friend, a intercessor named Father Nash. And Father Nash would go in weeks in advance to wherever he was going, and he would assemble groups of people, and they would pray for the outpouring of God before Charles Finney ever got there. And Charles Finney many times said that Father Nash was like his right arm. If he were not to have this intercessor, that it would be like walking around with one arm. Because this guy, he said, I do all the speaking, but he does all the heavy lifting. And so this guy was just a deep soul. He was actually a former pastor, and decided that, he didn't decide, God called him to prayer. And he said, you know what, I'm leaving the pastorate, I'm setting that aside, and I'm going to pray. And so he is a very notorious intercessor during the Second Great Awakening. And, it says he didn't pray for hours, he prayed for days. I mean, it was, when the Bible says pray without ceasing, he took it serious. And to be honest with you, most of these revivalists did the same thing too. John Wesley would not have an ordinary conversation for more than 15 minutes. If you wanted to ask questions of John Wesley, you have 15 minutes. I'm going back to prayer. That to me is profound. But again,
Well, even William Sizemore prayed for 5 hours a day until he had a vision or a word from the Holy Spirit said there's more.
oh yeah,
And then he went to 7 hours.
It's incredible. Charles, I get my names mixed up here. I was gonna say Charles Wesley, not Charles Wesley. Charles Spurgeon. Charles Spurgeon, whenever he preached, if he felt like people were there to, just out of curiosity, if there were more people in his meetings in curiosity instead of conviction, he would stop the meeting and he would leave. Because it's like, if you're here to see me, then you're not going to come here and see me. But if you're here to see Christ, then I'll stay,
Well,
And
was
he was just-
Wigglesworth was the one that
He was a
could
plumber.
not read.
He was illiterate. The only book he ever read was the
That's what
Bible.
I thought.
His wife taught him how to read.
Who was this?
This is Smith Wigglesworth. He was from England. And powerful man.
Only book he could read.
I read on him was
It's the only book he ever read was the Bible.
that somebody that came out of the Azusa Street who what got him started, he ignited him. So even after that, the testimonies of the Azusa Street, what happened there is what Wigglesworth.
I thought Wigglesworth was before this.
So that, am I wrong with that?
I don't know about that. But I know Wigglesworth had faith like nobody. Like he went into, they had a wake at someone's house. And he went and he said, why are you saying this man is dead? And he picked him up and threw him against the wall and he come back to life.
Yeah. Oh, he
I'm like-
crazy things happen.
Against the wall.
Yeah, I've read
I
about
would never do
him
that.
punching a guy that was on his last few breaths was dying of cancer. And he came up and punched him in the gut.
Yeah.
And he falls on the floor and everybody's like, you killed him. And he's like, no. And the guy lived. I mean, he was like, no, I wasn't punching him. I was punching, I can't forget how he said it, the disease or
Unbelievable.
whatever.
Yeah, the
cancer.
details that he would give too, like where he would pray over a tumor, and he said that in a matter of minutes, you would see the tumor exit the body. It would exit the body, and he said it looked like a ball of string or something. It said it was just nasty, but they just saw crazy things, and it's cool because of the details that they give are they had to have seen this, And so, things like that. I remember reading those things, thinking, "Wow, God can do anything." And
And to see those miracles and then some leave it out of their testimony or their books,
yeah,
like leaving the miracles out, that just doesn't
yeah,
make
it's,
sense.
even Ben Franklin, or not Ben Franklin, Thomas Jefferson did the same thing. He took the New Testament and made a New Testament. It's called the Jeffersonian Bible, and where he omitted all the miracles out of the Bible, out of the New Testament.
That's the whole New
And he
Testament.
totally disregarded the Old Testament. He's like,
Matthew,
I'm not even
Mark,
considering
Acts.
Thomas Jefferson.
Wigglesworth from 1859 to 1947.
Okay, so he was right in the middle of it then. Okay. Yeah, the Azusa Street was 1906 to 1909.
C.P. Jones was that guy named C. Charles Price Jones.
What now?
The Azusa Street.
Oh,
The guy from
okay.
Jackson.
Yeah.
C.P. Jones.
Yeah,
was
yeah,
the guy's
yeah.
name.
C.P.
Price.
I
Jones.
knew it, Charles Price.
Yeah,
Okay, yeah.
C.P. Jones.
Yeah.
'Cause I'm actually trying to figure out who that was and looking it up in the Google or
Yeah,
William Sizemore, you'll see it in Jackson, Mississippi this day. I can't find it.
yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, good stuff. I love it. All of this is exciting. This is our American history. It's cool because these things take place historically every 60 years. I don't know why 60 years, but if you pan through some of these, you'll see this connection. Every 60 years, there's something incredible that takes place.
Bring it on.
I'm telling you, I'm believing that it'll be more frequent than that. I think a lot of times people say, "Oh, the world's going to burn up." Well, I hope it burns up for Christ.
Well, now,
You know?
is Todd Smith's church still experiencing what it was?
Yeah,
So, I
They
mean,
are,
it's,
A lot of baptisms.
yes.
lot of healing, a lot
Healings
of
in their baptisms.
transformation in the baptismal, deliverance in the baptismal. They've got 2 now.
Yeah.
There's like fire on the top of the water.
Well, that's what he saw.
Yeah.
It's
Where
just
is
like,
this?
this is in Georgia, the Georgia Revival with Todd
Georgia
Smith.
Revival.
It's amazing. But anyway, well, thank you, Daniel.